as well with Marvel and DC, the behind the scenes, like the production aspect of it, also really affects, I think, the cohesive aspect of those two different universes. Because, like, if we're talking about Marvel, everything's owned and done and produced in a Disney studio, let's say. Whereas, like, DC, they, yeah, like, Marvel has, like, all sorts of different directors, but, like, Disney still, I think, has the final say. Whereas DC, I think it's, like, produced by different studios and also lots of different directors. So still in general, like, I feel like DC, all those movies feel very, like, separate from each other. They don't feel cohesive at all.
Yeah.
So in a way, like, Marvel is more successful because it's a more cohesive franchise, but DC, some of those movies you kind of find those gems, like the Nolan trilogy, but you also have to, like, root through a lot of
It does.
lesser movies, I guess, let's say. Like, some of those movies just aren't good, and I think that has to do with, like, the production rather than perhaps, like, the directors or anything like that, because you don't have that cohesion, you don't have that final Disney stamp of approval.
Yeah, it's interesting to think about the fact that Marvel is Disney, because Marvel movies, like, increasingly, I think, not necessarily like at the beginning with Iron Man, but now they're very, like, comedy is a big part of them. Like, they make the superheroes kind of, like, always wanting to have fun and jokey. Like, for example, Taika Waititi directed Thor, or at least the second one and the third one, I believe. And he is known for comedy. Like, he did What We Do in the Shadows. He did Jojo Rabbit. And, like, on the surface, you would think Jojo Rabbit would be, like, a pretty dark movie, because it is about the Nazi occupation. But, like, it was a comedy, So I think that maybe it has to do with, like, how Marvel is a little bit, because it is associated with Disney, and Disney is aimed at a younger audience, and it is known as more, like, heartfelt movies, even though Disney does have action movies and darker movies for sure. But I think maybe it is because of that association with Disney that Marvel movies have tended to be lighter superhero movies, at least lighter than Suicide Squad and the Dark Knight trilogy, etc.
Yeah, and just to your point, like, the progression to adding more comedic aspects into the Marvel franchise, let's say, it still makes sense, as in, like, it still is cohesive to, like, the really, really early Marvel movies. Like Iron Man, it's not, like, comedic or probably as polished as the later Marvel movies, but they still work together as, like, movies side by side and part of the same series and same franchise. And I think that actually is a big success for Disney, because Disney needs things to look quite similar. Like, I think that's how they kind of sell their merchandise. They make successful franchises is if things are consistent. Like Pirates, you always have, like, Jack Sparrow in the same pretty much outfit, and, like, with all the Disney princesses, like, even if you have, like, sequels and all of that, you still have a very similar aesthetic. Like, that is what Disney's trying to sell. I think they're very good at visually making things cohesive, even when the tone of a movie, like what we were saying about Marvel, shifts a little bit to, like, more comedic or leans into more action. I think they still are able to make it very, very, like, cohesive together, and I think that's really impressive.
And also the fact that Marvel movies have, like, ensemble films as well, where they have, like, this whole cast of characters, like the Avengers movie, which has, like, all of the superheroes. And DC, that universe doesn't really have those. Like, there is Suicide Squad, but not all of those different characters in the Suicide Squad movie have their own movies, right? And, like, yes, there have been a lot of different Batman movies, but every time they're, like, played by a different actor. Spider-Man has been played by 3 different actors within the past, like, decade and a half or something. So there's not that cohesion, there's not that consistency in DC movies that we see with Marvel. Maybe that's just because Marvel has, like, a bigger budget, and we're like, we want to have these same actors in these movies we have contracted people for like the next 10 movies, the next 15 years, whatever it is. I don't know. It just feels way more cohesive and like planned out when you have the same characters and the same actors across like, 5 different movies rather than switching them out every time.
I wonder if it is the like budget, because like Nolan movies, like they got bigger and bigger budgets, and then like I think Batman versus Superman, like that seems to have a big budget, and the new Batman like with Robert Pattinson, that seems like it has a big budget too. So I wonder if it is actually the amount of money per film, or if it is just like simply the fact that Disney's applying their money, financial resources in a different way. Because I think for Disney, like they have a lot of money to invest in the film, but they also have a lot of money to make it cohesive. And they also have like a plan of, if you sign on to do a Marvel film, you're probably going to stick around for at least like 5 to 7 years. And so that is like beyond just like resources. It's like forward looking, it's like long-term planning, and also it's like applying their resources in a very different way, like in almost like a spread out way rather than like a per film kind of way.
Yeah, because I do wonder, like, there have been some serious actors who are in Marvel movies. Not to say that, legit actors can't be superheroes, but Benedict Cumberbatch and Florence Pugh, like, they're now Marvel superheroes. And not that I think that they're, like, above those kinds of movies, but I'm wondering, like, what incentivized them to portray a superhero? Like, why was it? Is it because they can't turn down the money, or they just always wanted to portray a superhero? Like, I do wonder, because with some actors who are in those movies, I'm surprised, honestly, that they took the job.
But I think they can be really good actors in like more, let's say, like artsy intellectual films, but they are still actors, right? Like they're looking at the job as a job. I think there are some actors like Jodie Foster. She would never be in a Marvel film, and that's because she's more, I think she also like thinks about that, like, whereas I think there are different actors who like are just like, I just want to act. Whereas I think Jodie Foster and like her kind of like vibe of actors, those people also like intellectualize film as well. And so I kind of see like actors playing their role in the industry in various different ways. Like some do take a stance, and some probably are just like, I just want an interesting role and I'm just going to portray it. And I kind of feel like Florence Pugh and Benedict Cumberbatch is someone like that.
Yeah, I wish we had more intel into how actors pick roles, because once you get to a certain level of fame, I think a lot of actors don't actually have to audition anymore. Like, if directors are familiar with their work, then they'll just want to cast them. They'll have them in mind for a certain character. And so these actors must have like so many scripts sent to them, so many casting directors wanting to meet with them and to cast them in their film. And like, how do they decide? How do they decide what characters they want to play? Because I think that a lot of actors do have some sort of agenda. Like they want to play characters only in like social issue films, and or they're only interested in doing action movies, or they feel like they fit best in the comedic genre. So I would love to know more about how actors choose what films to be in. I think Daniel Radcliffe is one person who like has just been so all over the map with the work he does. Like, he's done every genre at this point, I think. I'm just always impressed with the Daniel Radcliffe.
And I think that it's probably more personal than that. Like, I think some actors are just going to be like, I just want to act. Some might be more specific in the things that they choose. But it's like humans. Like, if you're perhaps like a freelance graphic designer, you might gravitate towards certain projects, but some people just like want to do work. This actually kind of reminds me of like, I feel like we always go back to the La La Land discussion about like Ryan Gosling and like selling out. And I kind of feel like some people are in that discussion we were talking about, like, isn't it better to do jazz or to play jazz than not at all, which was what kind of like Ryan Gosling was struggling with in that film. And I think for some actors it's like, I just want to act, and that's like their life goal. And I still really appreciate the people who are just like dedicated to like the art and don't really necessarily feel like they want to get involved in the politics in the film industry, let's say, because of course like Marvel, for a lot of people in the industry, it's kind of political because of like just the amount of resources and amount of money they have.